Welcome to the Australian Building Codes Board's presentation of the changes to the 2022 edition of the NCC Volume 3. My name is Peter McLennan and I'm a Senior Project Officer for the Plumbing at the Australian Building Codes Board. In this video today, I will briefly outline some of the more significant changes you will find in NCC 2022. But first you might be wondering how all the regulatory framework works. As you can see on this slide, the local legislation deals with administrative matters such as licensing and approvals. At this level, everything is handled by the relevant state or territory government. This legislation is also what gives the PCA legal effect. This is where the ABCB are involved. We developed the Plumbing Code of Australia to set out the policy matters for plumbing, as well as looking after our product certification schemes such as Watermark. The NCC then references different standards to provide technical solutions. For plumbing, the key reference standards are, of course, AS/NZS 3500, which are developed and published by Standards Australia. On this slide, it shows some of the key dates in producing the NCC 2022. We released NCC 2022 for public consultation in the first half of 2021 and received a great feedback from the plumbing sector. To meet the deadline for the publication of the NCC, the key reference documents, such as AS/NZS 3500, were published later in 2021. Hopefully you all know that the 2022 PCA has already been published in preview mode and is available on the ABCB website. If you haven't already, jump on the website today and download a free copy. This preview has been released early to allow industry to become familiar with the changes ahead of the adoption of NCC. And of course, these seminar sessions are also intended to assist industry to become familiar with the changes to the NCC. The 2022 edition of the NCC is the biggest and most comprehensive update since inception. And, in fact, there are still a couple of big decisions to be finalised. The main one is a decision on the proposed changes to residential energy efficiency. That decision is expected to be made by the building ministers before the end of August. We recognise the challenge that presents with the scheduled commencement of the NCC on 1 September. We understand that the building ministers will also be considering transition arrangements that will delay the adoption of those provisions, and we have recommended that the adoption of the NCC should not be any earlier than October 1. As soon as we have more information and the building ministers have made a decision, we will let you know by sharing across our networks as widely as we can. The first change I should mention is a change to the structure and the numbering of the NCC provisions. The NCC has a completely new referencing system for 2022 as part of our digitisation strategy for the NCC. The old referencing system wasn't machine readable or consistent across all volumes, so to enable digitisation across the three codes, the referencing system had to be updated. Whilst this isn't a drastic change to the PCA, which moved towards this approach in the previous edition, this is a big numbering change for the BCA, and as I indicated, will bring all three volumes of the NCC into a consistent numbering structure. If you use the BCA for areas of work such as roofing, gutters and downpipes, you'll see some big changes here. When looking at Volume 1, there has not been a huge change. In fact, the only real change at this level for 2022 is that the special use buildings gets bumped into Section I, which leaves Section H empty for a housing section, which is contained in Volume 2. More on that in a moment. For Volume 1, things start to really change when you drill down into the parts. For NCC 2022, the acceptable construction practice in Section 3 is picked up and moved into a new reference document, the Housing Provisions Standard. Think of this as being like a reference standard. It's not in the NCC, but is called up by the NCC. It's not our first reference document. We already have the three ABCB reference standards, such as the standard for construction in flood hazard areas. So the idea of an ABCB standard isn't new, though this is our biggest move in relation to Volume 2. The numbering is broken into four key elements to indicate what area of the code you are looking at and the type of provision. In this example, you will see that the B indicates the section, B being the water services section of the PCA. The 1 indicates that it's part 1 of the section, which specifically covers cold water services. The P indicates that it's a performance requirement, or if it was a D, it would indicate that it was a deemed to satisfy provision. And the last number indicates that it's the first clause in the provision. In this example, Performance Requirement 1, which is for cold water supplies. Another change of interest is actually in the building code, and it's about floor wastes. Before I go into that change, the image on the slide shows a change room and the hand basin area of an office building. What might surprise you is that this floor waste is not required by the BCA. There is 3 areas that the BCA requires the installation of a floor waste. These are showers, which makes sense I'm sure, but the main areas are bathrooms or laundries above a sole occupancy unit and rooms containing urinals. In these areas, it's mandatory to have a floor waste installed. Okay, now on to the change, which relates to the fall of the floor for the floor waste. In Volume 1, as shown at the top of the screen, if you have a commercial building, which is a Class 2 or 3 building, or a Class 4 part of a building, and your bathroom or laundry is above a sole occupancy unit or a public space, then you must have a floor waste. This has always been the case since 1990. In the housing provisions in Volume 2, which relates to residential Class 1 buildings, this is slightly different, as you can see on the bottom part of the slide. The clause that states where a floor waste is installed, this clause isn't making you install a floor waste, but if you do put a floor waste in, then the BCA will now require the floor waste to be graded towards that waste. It's always been a good idea, but now it's mandatory with NCC 2022. After some major changes for commercial buildings in NCC 2019, building ministers decided the ABCB should develop an enhanced energy efficient provisions for residential buildings. This will be the first major stringency increase for residential energy efficiency in the NCC since 2010. Besides improvements for building envelopes, a whole of home approach will be introduced in the NCC 2022. The whole of home approach is a holistic approach to assess the energy performance of a building and covers all of the key appliances as well as the building envelope. A key point for the plumbing sector in relation to these energy efficiency requirements are that they won't change current work practices for plumbers, but may be used to inform which water heaters are selected through considerations of the wider house design. The NCC 2022 will be reducing the allowable lead content in plumbing products. Products which contain copper alloys and are intended for use in contact with drinking water will be required to have a weighted average lead content of no more than 0.25%. NCC 2022 will specify new requirements and will outline the transition period for this change, which I'll show you on the next slide. There are a few reasons for this change. One consideration was for international practices. Australia is a small market on the global scale, and consideration was given to what is happening internationally to ensure that Australia does not create more stringent requirements than other countries. If this happened, this requirement would become a barrier to trade and the importance of plumbing products. As such, this change will align with the levels set by other countries, such as the USA and Canada. And this consistency also ensures that there is suitable technology available to continue to manufacture copper alloy products compliant with this requirement. The second and major consideration was for the health benefits that can be achieved through this change. It is important to remember that existing plumbing products must meet stringent manufacturing and testing requirements to demonstrate compliance with the requirements of the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. That said, there are still health benefits which can be derived from the use of lead-free plumbing products in further reducing the potential for exposure to lead. The ABCB undertook analysis looking into this issue. The analysis also played a key part in defining the appropriate application of the lead requirements of the NCC 2022. Most people know that lead isn't great for you. Lead has long been recognised as a cumulative toxin, and once it enters the body, there is no level of lead in your blood that is considered safe. The health impacts of lead are most profound in children under 4 years of age and pregnant women. The advice from various health agencies encourage governments to eliminate non-essential uses of lead where possible. So that's what we have done. The application of the lead-free requirements is limited to products containing copper alloy and are in contact with the drinking water. These products include items such as fittings, valves, mixers, water heaters, water dispensers, and water meters. I mentioned before that there will be a transition timeframe for the lead-free plumbing products. There will be a 3-year transition period to allow manufacturers and suppliers time to ensure that there is sufficient lead-free plumbing products in the market by the 1st of September 2025. For now, there is nothing that needs to be done by the installer, but beyond the 1st of September in 2025, only lead-free plumbing products will be authorised for installation and existing products will no longer be able to be used. This is a big change for the industry, so we will talk more about this transition later on. So let's move into the compliance structure of the PCA. As we work our way through the seminar today, we will provide an indicator of where the requirements sit within the compliance structure of the PCA. I will take you through the detail of the changes to the PCA in 2022, which you can use to demonstrate compliance with these performance requirements. There are a number of changes to the deemed to satisfy provisions, and I will introduce to you a few new verification methods, which can also be used to demonstrate compliance through a performance solution. The deemed to satisfy provisions are prescriptive, like a recipe book. They tell you what and in which location things must be done. They include materials, components, design factors, and construction methods that, if used, are deemed to meet the performance requirements, hence the term deemed to satisfy. As the slide indicates, it is important to reiterate that to meet the performance requirements of the PCA, you can use a performance solution, a DTS, or a mix of both. If using a performance solution or a mix of performance solution and deemed to satisfy provision, the proposed solution would generally require local government consent prior to the work being carried out. Now we have been through the changes to the performance requirements, we will talk a little bit about performance solutions. It is important to remember that if you are using a deemed to satisfy solution, such as an AS NZS 3500, you do not need to demonstrate compliance with the performance requirements as the solution being used has already been deemed to meet this requirement, hence the name. NCC 2022 outlines the required processes for developing a performance solution. This requires project stakeholders to collaborate and develop an agreed pathway for the design process to follow. This process will ensure that the solution produces an acceptable outcome. As you can see on the slide, there are 4 key stages. A performance-based design brief is stage 1. This is a document that is developed in collaboration with key stakeholders and proposes how the performance-based solution will meet the requirements of the NCC. The second stage is analysis. Given that each performance solution is unique, each proposal will require a specific analysis relevant to its complexity. Once completed, it is then necessary to collate and evaluate the results from the analysis and draw conclusions which form the final report. The final report will clearly demonstrate that compliance with the NCC performance requirements has been achieved. The ABCB has a large amount of resources available on our website to assist you in this area. So if you want to know more, just jump online and take a look.